Hollow is seeing a lot of play with the grenade kit currently in PvP, but that doesn't really hold up as well in World vs. World because it's so much more open space. It's harder to land ground targets on moving targets when there's no node to bait people to stand on. So I created this Hollowsmith build, and it has a lot more mobility to make up for roaming situations and being outnumbered with the rocket boots, and it has a lot of damage and sustain from the tools and explosives trait lines to allow you to make up for the large scale situations you're going to be in rather than small scale. So the idea of the build is basically you just have the tools and explosives trait lines which have a lot of synergy with each other. So tools basically gives you vigor, and vigor gives you more dodges. The more dodges you get, the more explosive entrances you get. So both of these trait lines just work so well with each other, and the more dodges you do, the more damage and the more blinds you're giving out, and it's just so much synergy. But you can't really go for that if you're going Hollowsmith, because you need that alchemy trait line to give you a lot more sustain. So in World vs. World, you are able to make up for that with the cleansing sigil, so that kind of allows you to use the prismatic converter trait with the cleansing sigil to give you all the cleanse that you need basically, and that allows you to forego alchemy. Now there's a lot of healing that you get from alchemy, but you make up for not having that healing with the sustain of rocket boots, disengage, and the toolkit, which gives you a 2-second block on a very short cooldown. So it's really good for kind of like this in and out play style that you'll see more in roaming rather than a sustained fight kind of play style in PvP. But that's not to say that it doesn't have a lot of sustain in large fights, because it's using the Corona Burst trait, which whenever you hit a target with Corona Burst, you're going to gain barrier, and that can scale up to about like 4,000 barrier if you hit 5 targets. So in Zergs, that can give you a lot of sustain there too as well. So that's kind of the idea. Is it's good for large scale fights, and it has mobility for engaging and getting bursts off in smaller ones, and disengaging as well when you're outnumbered or if you're in a 1v1 that's unfavorable in World vs. World. So let's go over more in depth into the traits. So tools, you get vigor whenever you use a tool belt skill. So all of your tool belt skills are here. They're generally lower cooldown than normal because of the mechanized deployment trait, which reduces all of your tool belt skills recharge by 15%. So that's kind of nice. Your tool belt skills in general are pretty strong, other than maybe rocket kick. So having lower cooldown on them and getting vigor on them as well is really good, because vigor gives you 10% more damage while it is active. So the more you're using your tool belt skills, the more damage you're doing. And also what's important to know is that your Photon Forge, which you're going to be entering in and leaving very often, is going to also count as a tool belt skill. So as you can see there, I enter, it gives vigor. And then when you leave, it also counts as a tool belt skill. So you get a lot of vigor uptime from this, and it just gives you a lot of synergy, as I said, with all of these traits. So there's a lot of actual choices in this build for what traits to choose other than the minors. So the first one I go for is reactive lenses, and this is a passive trait. Whenever you get CC'd or you get blinded, it will activate lesser utility goggles, which will remove blind and then give you resistance for 2 seconds and protection for 3.5 seconds. And it'll also break stun. So basically, you can get a free CC ignore basically every 32 seconds, so it's pretty nice. And that cooldown is reduced by the Gadgeteer trait, which reduces all gadget traits. So this this trait acts as like a minor gadget. So it's kind of nice there, the synergy. And the reason why I like this is because it works very well with the rifle. So rifle, what it does is it knocks you back. And as you can see there, I immediately stun broke myself passively with the reactive lenses trait. So you can be very aggressive with your skills like that. So that's why I like that. And just in general, Engineer is kind of countered by CCs. So having more CC removal, even if it's passive and you can't control it, is just really good. And it's a low enough cooldown that you'll actually feel it save you a lot of the time. So you can take Power Wrench, which will reduce your elite's cooldown by 1 second every time you dodge, and it will reduce the recharge of your tool belt skills and increase the damage that they do, or the effectiveness of them. But I feel that the cooldown of your Prime Light Beam is already low enough, and your tool belt skills, yeah, they're good and all, but does it really compare to removing CC? Think of it as like, what is the one thing that's going to kill you as an NG? It's CC. So there's really nothing that can compare to removing the counterplay of a class, right? So yeah, that's its weakness, and this is the answer to that, right? So it's a really good trait. And you also will have Lock On. So Lock On is a really good trait for the synergy of this build. Whenever you hit a foe that is in stealth or disable a foe, you will gain an invisible analysis, and that will give you Fury, which is nice because this is a power build that wants to crit. It'll give the target 5 vuln, which is really good, as we'll see later, and then it'll reveal the target, and it also kind of like counts as a tool belt skill, because I think it's I'm not sure which tool belt it's based off of, but it's basically a tool belt skill. So it'll give you Vigor, which, as we already know, gives you tons of synergy with this build, and it'll reveal the target. So this is really good because, as you can see here, there's 2 abilities. They're basically the same thing. So you'll reveal the target when you CC them, and you'll also reveal them when you hit them when they're in stealth. So this is really good for countering thieves, and it's just insane because in World versus World, stealth is really strong, and it helps you to secure kills, and the vulnerability that it gives you on the target helps you to burst them down. And there's a lot of synergy with the explosives trait line as well, because your vulnerability stacks get extra effectiveness because of the explosives trait. So really good synergy, as I mentioned before, between these two trait lines. Finally, you have the Gadgeteer trait. This will reduce the cooldown of your gadgets. You only really have one gadget other than this trait, so it's not amazing, but because you're using rocket boots, it's kind of amazing with rocket boots, right? Because it increases the effectiveness, reduces the cooldown, and gives it added effects to your rocket boots. And it's a very important skill for you. So that's a nice trait to take. There's really no other option there. You can take streamlined kits if you really want, because the only swiftness access this build has is from the Hollow 2, and that's a 3-second swiftness, and the cooldown is 2 seconds. So if you're using Hollow Leap off cooldown, then you have enough swiftness, but you're generally not using it off cooldown. So you kind of have to fill in the gap with the super speed from rocket boots. And if you really want to forego the amazing kill potential of lock-on, then you can take streamlined kits, which will give you swiftness every time you enter into your toolkit. Well, not every time, but enough to give you basically permanent swiftness. But lock-on is just way too good in my opinion, and you have enough swiftness, I believe, with your Hollow Leap anyways. So next you have explosives. Explosives is going to give you explosive entrance, which is honestly probably going to see some nerfs soon, but whenever you enter into combat, your first hit will proc an explosive entrance, which basically does like an AoE around the target, and it does pretty high base damage, and you can have a lot of traits that scale with it. And that will also proc again after your dodge roll. So a lot of dodges in the build, as I said, because of vigor, and the more you dodge, the more you're going to get this explosive entrance, and it just adds so much damage to the build passively, basically. So it's just really good for a build that wants to do damage, because not only are you using your dodge roll normally, because Guild Wars 2 is all about evading damage rather than tanking it, so it just kind of fits into any kind of PvP build naturally to just have an on-dodge effect. But also, you don't really need to play around it that much, right? It's just very kind of passive, so it's easy to use. So short fuse pretty much just gives you fury uptime, because you're not using grenades. You don't need to take the grenadier trait, so you get a lot of fury uptime, and that's really important for engineers because they don't really have a lot of fury access. So they often use like vision sigil, which I'm not using, which allows you to take 2 really strong sigils instead, and you get like 60 or 50 to 70 crit chance because of fury. So 70% is pretty good, and you'll also deal vulnerability on all of your explosions. So explosions are kind of a weird thing. Some of your skills count as explosions. It's not really that important to know this. It's just you'll get an extra little bit of damage boost because you're doing more vulnerability. Next is Blast Shield. This gives you vitality based on your power. You're going to be running full Zerker, so you've got as much power as you can get, and that means you're going to get a lot of vitality. So because you don't take any of the defensive stats from your gear, it allows you to get more synergy from this trait and kind of give you enough survivability just from this trait to have a well-rounded feeling build. So it's really nice. You also get barrier whenever your explosive entrance hits, so it's a little bit of sustain, but it scales up over time because you're dodging a lot and hitting a lot of explosive entrances. So yeah, that's really good. You can also take explosive temper though if you have like a lot of support from your team, and what that'll do is it'll give you stacks of ferocity, and it stacks up to 10 times, so you can get 200 ferocity, which is actually quite a bit. So explosive temper is probably pretty close in comparison to blast shield. But since this build isn't using alchemy, I would say that you'd want to go for more sustain. And then you have shaped charge, which increases the effectiveness of each Vuln stack by 0.5. So instead of doing 1% more damage on every Vuln stack, you'll deal 1.5% more. So at 25 stacks, you'll do 37% more damage. And then finally, you have Flashbang. Flashbang is very strong in small scale situations because whenever your explosive entrance hits, it will blind the target. It has a little bit of a daze thing when they're above 90% HP, but that's not too important. Basically, blinding every time you dodge is super important because after you dodge, the enemy wants to attack you. So it gives you a lot of momentum because you evade an attack, which is preventing someone from hitting you, and then you play aggressively and hit the opponent right after you dodge, and you blind another attack. So every time you dodge, you can essentially get like 2 kind of evades, but obviously it's not exactly that because not all skills are one hit, and obviously there's a lot of counterplay to blind, but it adds up over time because explosive entrance is hitting so often because you're dodging so much. So yeah, it gives you a lot of momentum in small scale fights, and because explosive entrance is AoE, it's an AoE blind. So it just gives you a lot of self peel for yourself and sustain, which you kind of need to survive. And then you can, if you really want, if you're in like a Zerg kind of situation, use Big Boomer. And Big Boomer is going to give you 10% more damage to foes who are lower health percentage than you, and you can tell that by the option that tells you, it's right here I think, combat, maybe it's up here, yeah, show target health percent, and you can see if they're lower health than you, but you're not really going to think about that much. Basically what you're going to use this for is just extra damage in larger scale situations and the extra sustain as well. So whenever you land an explosion, you heal basically 100 every second for 3 seconds, and you're exploding quite a lot, right? Because your explosive entrance is an explosion. Your Corona Burst is an explosion, so you can pretty much keep that up constantly, and combined with heat therapy and the barrier that you're gaining from a lot of stuff, it gives you a lot of sustain to survive like Zerg fights, and you can sort of like stay on the edges of the Zerg and have a lot of sustain. So that's kind of good if you want to go into larger fights, but small scale, you definitely want that blind. Then you have the Hollow trait line. So Hollow gives you Prismatic Converter, which is whenever you deactivate your forge, you will convert conditions into boons based on your heat level. And so basically below 50% heat, you want to, well, you'll convert 1 boon, and above 50% heat, you'll convert 2 boons. And how the build kind of works is every one of your skills uses heat, but mostly you'll be using your 3 and your 2 skills, and those don't use up that much heat. And you want to be above 50% heat most of the time, because when you leave Forge, right, you'll get more value and more boons and more cleanse from it. So you do want to use sometimes your 4 and your 5 skill, even though they cost a lot more heat and they're not as much value to you, just so that you can maintain the sustain from Prismatic Converter. And there's other synergies with having high heat as well. But anyways, heat therapy is one of those synergies. So you gain health per unit of heat lost, which means the more heat you have, when you leave Forge, you'll heal more. So that's just another good Hollow trait. You have also Crystal Configuration Eclipse, which makes your Corona Burst grant barrier for each target struck. So if I hit 3 targets with my Corona, that's 2.5 barrier, and since Corona hits twice, it can proc double the amount. So that's 4k barrier from hitting 3 targets twice. It's a lot of sustain and it adds up over time. And if you're, as I said earlier, if you're in Zerg fights, you can easily hit the maximum amount, which would be about 4k, and if it hits twice, that would be 8k or 9k-ish barrier per Corona. That gives you insane sustain in large fights. So it allows you to be very aggressive, and it's kind of like fun to play Hollow in large fights because of this, because you can just go in and be ham and not feel like you're gonna die at any second, because you're shrugging off a lot of damage to barrier. You also have Laser's Edge, which gives you more damage while in your forge, so not out of your forge, but while you're in the forge, based on how much heat you have. So it scales up to 15% more damage. So yeah, as I said earlier, you want to be at higher heats, and you want to be maintaining that heat and preventing you from hitting the maximum, right? Because if you hit the maximum, you overheat, and that's a lot of bad stuff that's going to happen to you. Finally is Vent Exhaust. So there's basically 2 traits, right? You have the meme trait, but then you have the 2 real traits. Enhanced storage capacity, you have more heat capacity, but you have less heat management. So what it basically means is you have these long phases where you are in forge, and then you have long phases where you're out of forge. Vent Exhaust is the opposite. You have short phases where you're in forge, and then short phases where you're out. So you're going in and out a lot more often, which means you're getting more procs from Prismatic Converter, which is more sustain. And basically what it does is whenever you dodge roll, you're going to do a little bit of damage and burning nearby, which is kind of irrelevant, but it makes you lose heat, 15% of your heat each time you dodge. So you're dodging a lot, as I said in this build, and that helps you to manage your heat very well. And basically the playstyle of this build is, because you're on a rifle build, you have a lot of burst potential with the rifle, but it doesn't have a lot of sustain. So you get your sustain damage from the forge. So you want to go into your forge, use a lot of your heat, and then maintain that heat by dodging, and sort of having this, like, while your 2 and your 3 skill are on cooldown, you'll like dodge and then use Explosive Entrance, and then use your 2 and your 3, and then you'll dodge, and then you use your 2, and it's just a very fluid combo or rotation to go through while you're in forge, and then you can leave forge and then do all your other stuff or something like that. So it allows you to be very aggressive and use the forge skills more often, right? Because when you have enhanced storage capacity, you can use them for longer until you overheat, but then you have to wait for all that heat to come off. Whereas with Vent Exhaust, in a way, you kind of do have more capacity, right? Because while you're getting your heat up, you're losing the heat as well, because you're dodging in your rotation. So in a way, Vent Exhaust is actually just better. But obviously this trait gives you might too, so that's good too, but it's not going to work out for this kind of build playstyle. So those are pretty much the traits. Let's move over to the equipment. The equipment is full Zerker. I don't have full Zerker because I didn't feel like moving over trinkets to my engineer, but you should basically be running full Zerker, and I take durability runes for a little bit more survivability on this build. It gives you some toughness, some boon duration, and increases your maximum health, and then just gives you passive protection. And combined with the protection from lesser utility goggles, you gain a little bit of protection here and there. What's nice about the protection though is the timing of the protection. So when you get CC'd, you gain protection, right? And when you get CC'd, that's kind of when people are trying to do damage to you. And then with the durability rune, it procs whenever you're hit. So it gives you protection when you're about to be hit. It doesn't just like passively give it out at a random time. It gives it right as you're being hit. So the timing of your protection in this build is very good, even though it's very low uptime. So that gives you a lot of sustain in reducing the damage when you need it, rather than wasting it because the passives are proccing at the wrong time. So yeah, that's really good. You're taking a rifle with cleansing energy. So cleansing is really good because you need cleanse on engineer. It's usually lacking in cleanse, and that's 3 Condi's cleanse every time you weapon swap. But as an engineer, you don't weapon swap, you go into kits. So Hollow Forge counts as a kit. Going in and out of that in combination with Prismatic Converter can give you, 5 Condi cleanse very often. So it's really good. And also toolkit counts as weapon swapping. I have a secondary rifle as well. Now, it doesn't really matter what you have on the secondary rifle. I just have a Bloodlust sigil on that. And the reason for that is you can swap weapons in World vs. World, but you'll never be using this other weapon other than in a situation where you're stacking up the Bloodlust sigil. So what you can do is you can stack up the Bloodlust sigil, say you're like Zerging or whatever, and you're just getting free kills. You can swap to your secondary rifle, stack up the Bloodlust, and then just stick on your normal rifle, which will give you basically the sigils that you want. However, I don't really think this is that important because you're playing a little bit too greedy that way, and if you're trying to stack up your sigil, it's going to be harder to get kills, especially if you're in small scale situations. So I just prefer to be energy cleansing because I like to play aggressively, and I don't really care if I go downstate or if I die. I just like to be aggressive. So I like to just stick with the energy cleansing and just stick with that. But yeah, energy on top of cleansing is super good because you get a full dodge. You've already got tons of vigor on this build, and having more dodges just from the energy is going to give you more heat management. It's going to give you more explosive entrance, and it's just going to be so much synergy for this build. And of course, dodging is just more sustain in general. So yeah, it's just really good with this build to have energy and cleansing. So yeah, that's pretty much it's pretty simple, just full Zerg durability. Durability runes are probably one of the best runes in the game because you can just go an aggressive build and then just slap on durability runes, and it's a pretty balanced build. So yeah, that's pretty much, the gear is pretty self-explanatory. The food that I use is the Orion truffle and meat stew. This will give you more dodge because of the endurance regeneration. I know I said you have a lot of vigor uptime on this build, but it's not permanent. And the times that you don't have vigor, it's going to feel bad. And the times that you do have vigor, it actually still scales a little bit with the endurance food. So it's just, as I said, so much synergy to dodge on this build. So having as much as you can get is just going to be better. And then sharpening stone, I just use any kind of like power sharpening stone. It doesn't really matter. For the skills, I'm not really going to go through all of the skills one by one. How the build works is more of like combos and groups of skills that work together. If you know that a water field with a leap finisher and a blast finisher equals a heal in the area or for yourself, you can see that this build has a lot of sustain if you can manage your combos. So your F1 is regenerating mist, and you combine that usually with your jump shot, your Hollow Forge 2, or your rocket boots. And what it basically does is it does a very short water field, and it gives regen and vigor. But basically, the water field is so short that you have to immediately use your leap afterwards. So it's not enough time for you to do a cast skill where the finisher is at the end. It has to be the finisher starts at the very beginning of the skill. So you do your F1 and then you use your 2 skill. It's a nice little 2k heal because you have 1k from the regen almost, and then another 1k from the heal finisher. And also, you can combine this with your healing turret, and this is the main reason why I use the healing turret, is because even though it's kind of a longish cooldown and it really doesn't give you that much healing, it gives you a lot of healing eventually when you combine all of your finishers through it. So you can use Jump Shot, you can use your Rocket Boots, you can use Forge 2, Forge 5, and pretty much land all of those within the duration of it. So it's a really long duration. So I can do, usually you do your 5 skill and your heal turret at the same time. And your healing turret will also do a little bit of damage on the location, and that'll be an explosion. So you'll do your 5, you'll break the thing, then you'll 2, and then you can Rocket Boots again and get the 4th finisher there. Yeah, it's just a really good heal skill because it heals for like 4k-ish just by using the first cast and the second cast of the healing turret. Then you get 2 more blasts from your forge skills, and then you get Rocket Boots at the end. So yeah, really good at just basically giving you kind of like a full reset. And yeah, so whenever you have your healing turret up, it's just massive resustain. As long as you make sure that you have enough, you manage your heat enough that you can actually use those skills. And that's why Vent Exhaust is really good with healing turret, because what you can do is you can go into your forge and then use your healing turret, use your 5, and then maybe dodge and then use your 2 to make sure you don't overheat while trying to get a lot of healing. Because on an enhanced storage capacity build, you can't really afford to just throw out those skills like that because you'll overheat. So that's kind of the reasoning behind healing turret. You also have your, well, let's just go over the defensive combos right now. So you have Tossed Elixir S. This gives a 3 seconds stealth on the ground targeted location. So generally while you're moving, you want to put it a little bit ahead of you, and then you'll walk into the location. You can give this to allies to prevent them from being stomped from enemies, or just in general for creating like a reset kind of situation. So Rocket Boots is another thing that you're going to be using a lot for sustain. It's going to give you, with the Gadgeteer trait, a 16-second cooldown skill that gives you basically a hard reset or disengage. And you can also do this to chase people, of course, and it gives you 2 seconds of super speed afterwards, so it's really good at just giving you more momentum. And it's also a combo finisher blast, so as I mentioned, you can combo that with your heal. And it's kind of weird, but underwater there's a different skill than above water. So if you're being chased and you use all your Rocket Boots charges, you can go underwater and use 2 more, and that's really good for escaping. So you have tons of mobility, and Rocket Boots is just really nice. You can like precast Corona Burst, and then you can Rocket Boots in, and then the Corona Burst will hit once you jump in. And Corona Burst is kind of like your bread and butter skill with this build. It's just a massive AoE around you, 300 radius, and so the first time it hits is you use an animation, and then it will sort of have a delay before the second one hits. So you can be using other skills during that time. So usually the second Corona Burst is the more important one to land because you can combo it with other things. And just in general, it's so strong because it gives you might, gives you 5 might, it gives 8 vulnerability, 9 because of the explosives trait line. So the second hit will give you up to 18 vulnerability, and we know that that gives you a lot more synergy with the explosives trait line because of shape charge. So it just allows you to do so much damage. And one thing to remember with Corona Burst is it's a very safe skill to use when you're about to overheat. So what it does is it stacks up a little bit of might, and then it's gaining heat while that might is stacking up, and it won't overheat you if you leave Forge while it's stacking up. So I can use the 3 skill here and leave Forge, and it goes up to like 100 heat, but I don't overheat. So as long as you're not in Forge, you can pretty much always use Corona Burst as long as you leave Photon Forge right after it. So that's generally going to be when you're leaving Photon Forge, you want to wait until you can use a Corona Burst, and then you'll leave it, and then you can get the most out of your heat that way. And yeah, that's pretty much the skill you want to be always using because it does a lot of damage, and it's just such a low amount of heat to use it. It's such a low cooldown. You're just constantly going into melee. It's cleaving all around you. Like, you don't even have to aim it. It's just such a good skill. So you're pretty much using that with the Hollow Leap all the time when you're in Forge. So you use the Hollow Leap. This gives you 3 seconds of swiftness, so that's pretty much the only way you get swiftness on this build. And you do kind of like a rotation. So your Hollow Leap just leaps you at the target, does a decent amount of damage, and it gives you swiftness. Then when you're in melee range, you want to use your Corona Burst, and then both of those skills have like really low cooldowns. So this is a 2-second cooldown, and this is a 6-second cooldown. So you do your leap, you do Corona, and then you probably leap again, and then you'll like dodge or something like that. And whenever you dodge, you're obviously giving yourself a little bit of damage from explosive entrance. And so while you're in your Forge, your rotation is pretty much use 2 and 3 off cooldown, then dodge, then use your 2 maybe again, and then you can use your auto attack. Your auto attacks are very good and very wide range. And then by that time, you use your 3, leave Forge, and then do some rifle skills. So the rifle skills, let's go over some combos with that. So on your 2 skill, you have an Immobilize. The Immobilize is really good with landing your jump shot. So the Immobilize is 2 seconds, and it's just a projectile. And you can use that with jump shot because while they're immobilized, they can't really dodge. So your jump shot is just a really heavy hitting ability when it crits, as you can see. So usually the Rifle 2 and the Rifle 5 are best used together. Another combo that you can use is the Rifle 4 with the Throw Wrench ability. So what Rifle 4 does is it will remove all movement inhibiting conditions on you. So when you're immobilized, it actually gets you out of that, and it knocks you back, and it also knocks the foe back. So it creates a big gap between you and the target. And also because it knocks you back, it will passively proc your reactive lenses if that's off cooldown. So instead of being knocked back, you can just knock the enemy back sometimes. So this is really good with Throw Wrench, which does, as you can see, 1000 base damage. And you throw a wrench out, it goes out, and then it comes back to you. So it can hit twice if they don't move out of the line that it shoots out in. So it's really good with Overcharge Shot because this not only CCs them so that they stand in range of the Throw Wrench, but Throw Wrench is also better used when at a certain range from the target. So when you throw it out, right, it goes out and then it comes back. And if you're closer to the target, there's more time between the wrenches, both hits hitting the target. So it leaves more room for the target to basically avoid one of them. So what you want to do is use Overcharge Shot, which will create a little bit of distance between you and the target. And when you get to that sweet spot, your Throw Wrench can hit twice within a very short amount of time, and it lets you land a really good burst that way. And as you could see, it did like 2.7k each hit. So it does a lot of damage. So Generally, you do overcharge shot into throw range, and you can then combo that with like the net shot into jump shot. Obviously, at some point they're going to have cooldowns to avoid something, so these combo pieces can be interchanged anywhere and fit into any situation. Rocket Kick is not really that good. It's okay to use in melee range if you've got nothing better to do, and say you can't go into Forge. It does 1000 damage, but it's kind of clunky, it's hard to hit. It does a lot of burning, but yeah, it's a little bit hard to hit. So let's talk about the other Forge skills you can use. Photon Blitz is a pretty high heat cost. It'll give you a decent amount of heat, but it does a decent amount of damage too from range. So while you're in your Forge, you're mostly melee, and all of your skills have low range. So Photon Blitz is actually pretty good because it allows you to stick to targets that are trying to kite you, and you generally just want to use the skill. It's a little bit longer cooldown than your 2 and your 3 in Forge, so you want to just use it basically when your 2 and your 3 are off cooldown. So you'll do like your normal rotation, you'll go into 2 into 3, dodge, and then you do your 2, and then you'll do your like Photon Blitz, and then maybe you'll do your 2 again, and then you'll dodge, and then you use your 3, and then you leave, and something like that. So that's pretty much how it works there. It's very rotation based. The 5 skill is a very short range knock, kind of like stun effect. It's actually a launch, but yeah, it costs so much heat, so you don't really want to use it that often. I pretty much use it with my healing turret only, or if I really need to CC someone and I know that they're not going to move, or like you can rocket boots ahead of someone, for example, because like the range that you use it in is it's not very wide. So what you can do is rocket boots ahead of them and then use it here while they're running this way, and then you can sort of catch them with it. So yeah, otherwise you don't really use it that much because it uses up too much heat. But there are some cases where you do want to have above 50% heat for Prime Light Beam. So Prime Light Beam is a really strong attack. It's a basically 1200 range beam. It can be line of sighted, but it pierces basically, and it'll hit everything in its path. So like this target will get hit as well, and it's pretty wide range as you can see, and it knocks back all targets hit. And when you are above 50% heat, so you want to be above 50% heat when you use it, usually, it leaves a fire field on the ground, and the fire field doesn't do that much damage, but it ticks 10 times, and it gives burning, and it gives damage, so it adds up over time. So what you want to do is combo Prime Light Beam with another CC skill. So say you put your Prime Light Beam on someone, they're knocked back into the field. Then what you can do is you can leave and use your Rifle 4 to knock them back again, use your Throw Wrench, and then immobilize them in the field, and then jump shot on them. And yeah, there's really big combos you can do when you add Prime Light Beam into the mix, because they're taking all that damage while they're being CC'd. So it's really strong, Prime Light Beam. And let's go over the toolkit. So toolkit is your only kit other than your Photon Forge, and whenever you use your toolkit, you're pretty much only going to be using it for the Gear Shield. So Gear Shield is a 2-second block on a 20-second cooldown, so that's kind of nice because you're not taking the sword shield with Hollowsmith, because you're not really staying in like melee long enough for you to want to use the forge and then use the shield sword set. So you do really like the rifle with the set, but you do want to have that block because avoiding damage is really good, and sometimes you're not going to have the mobility to survive, or you still want to be in melee range to land a lot of your abilities. And the 2 seconds of block is pretty good, and getting it every 20 seconds is pretty decent sustain. So you can like do tricks where you use Corona Burst and then swap into Toolkit and just be blocking while it's proccing on them. You do have some decent kiting ability from Box of Nails. So what this does is it puts Caltrops on the floor, and it'll cripple anyone who steps in them for 4 seconds. For like 2 seconds it'll give the cripple. And when you're kiting, you generally just put this behind you, or you'll put it on top of yourself, and then someone who's chasing you will have to walk through it. And while it's not that good, it's just something to use, and it makes a difference sometimes. So it's actually not useless. You're mainly using the gear shield, and then you also have the Prybar magnet combo. So basically, Prybar is a very heavy hitting ability, 1600 base damage, and if that crits, it can do, well, it didn't crit there, but it can do up to like 5k damage. I've hit before. And it'll do 6 confusion for 3 seconds, which is okay. I mean, it's a power build, but mainly that power damage is what you want, and it's a melee attack. It's a decently low cooldown, but it's kind of hard to hit. So how you usually land it is you use your magnet, which is a 1200 range unblockable pull. So what it does is it kind of like puts out this animation of you trying to pull them. As you can see, like, it does that thing, and then you'll Prybar them after it comes in. It did like 4.4k on a camp supervisor there. So that's really good. One thing you can do though, because that's a very big tell, like nothing else in the game has that animation, so when people see that, they know you're trying to pull them. So what you can actually do is you can enable retargeting. So this is under combat, I believe. So allow skill retargeting, and what you can do is you can actually not target anything and then start targeting something, and the animation is a little bit more hidden. And the longer that you wait to do that, the less the animation is, right? So I think there I did it too early, so there was an animation. But if I waited longer, there would probably be no animation. And it's the same thing with Prime Light Beam. Prime Light Beam is a very big animation, right? You do it like this, and I didn't actually stow it there because I was in the toolkit. Yeah, you got to be careful with that. If you're in toolkit, you can't actually stow, so you got to be careful. But yeah, anyways, Prime Light Beam has a very big animation. You kneel down, and then there's like this big light effect before it happens. So retargeting the Prime Light Beam is really good as well, because you can be facing in this direction and maybe there's someone over here, and then this guy over here thinks he's jumping on you, and then you retarget to him and you put the Prime Light Beam on him. So yeah, something like this where you're not targeting anything and then you put the beam on them. Yeah, that had no animation there. So that's pretty strong in my opinion, not very interactive. And yeah, the whole Prime Light Beam thing, you can do it like this as well. So it's just really good to retarget like that, to be unpredictable. So your auto attack on rifle is not the best. It's been nerfed over time, so it's really kind of just filler. What it is nice for is proccing explosive entrance. So it's just really long range, and you can dodge and then just proc it from range, and it's okay. It's not amazing, but yeah. Finally, the Elixir S is a good 3-second invuln. Now, because you're not alchemy with HGH, that's not a 4-second duration, so you have to get used to it being only 3 seconds, because how a lot of people use it is they stomp an enemy while in Elixir S, and because the stomp animation is 4 seconds, you have to wait like a second in your stomp animation to secure the stomp with Elixir S. So you just become tiny like this, and you can actually res your allies as well while you're tiny. And it's a little bit different than Mistform or other invulnerabilities, because you can interact, or at least begin interacting with downstate bodies, allied or enemy, after you go into the form. So it's very flexible in that way. Whereas with other skills that go invuln for you, like Mist Form, you already have to be interacting with the target to do it. So Elixir S is really good for team play, getting stomps, getting reses. You want to know those very combo-oriented skill sets, right? So you have your Rifle 4 into the Throw Wrench, you have your Rifle 2 into Rifle 5, and you have your you want to be spamming your 2 and your 3 in Hollow Forge, and then use your Dodge Roll as a rotation. Use Photon Blitz in the middle of the 2 and 3 cooldowns. Then use your 3 right before you're about to leave Forge, so you use enough heat and keep your heat very high. Use Prime Light Beam. Maybe you can do a little bit of a retarget trick there to land it. Get some nice CC on them. And then you go in for like a secondary burst here, where you maybe spam a little bit more abilities. Do the 2 into 3, into 2, into 4, into 2, into 3. And then you back off again. Dodge. Maybe you'll pull them with the magnet on this guy. And then you got them. I'll use Corona and I'll Rocket Boots in. And yeah, it's just a pretty heavy damage build in Zerg situations, because you have the Corona Burst dealing so much AoE damage and giving you tons of sustain with the barrier per hit. And obviously, if you hit 3 targets, right, as you can see, that's 2.4k or 2.2k barrier per 3 targets you hit, and then it hits twice. But if you're hitting 5 targets, which is kind of rare, but you'd get a lot more barrier. You can get up to like 8k barrier if you hit both of your hits 5 times. So it's really good in Zergs when you get a little bit of support, or it's really good in small scale situations where you have a lot of like single target CCs to lock targets down for your team, and then you have burst to complement it as well. And another thing is your Prime Light Beam is super strong with the explosive entrance. So what you can do is, say for example, there's a Zerg there. Just say this is a Zerg. I can use Prime Light Beam on them and get the field on them, and it's just ticking, and then I can just dodge, and that'll give me explosive entrance procs. And I could just be in the safety of my tower or whatever, and I could be proccing explosive entrance on multiple targets while I'm in the safety of my tower, because I've got the Prime Light Beam proccing off. And yeah, there's just so much synergy and play around this build, so I like it.